It's the Elsa Show with Clay Novak. Conservative views on world news. Brought to you by the Wellness Company. Prepare for the unexpected. And Refuge Medical. And now, it's time for the show.
Hey everybody, Clay Novak here for the Elsa Show with Clay Novak. I'm flying solo this week. Elsa is down visiting her beautiful grandbabies down in Florida. But before you run away, because Elsa is not here, we're going to be covering a lot. I'm going to be covering a lot this week. The National Security Leaders for America letter that endorses Vice President Harris. We're going to talk about gang violence and an impending gang war in Chicago, along with President Biden's first cabinet meeting in almost a year. So stick with me. We'll start up right after this. Okay, first topic for the week is this National Security Leaders for America letter endorsing Vice President Harris for president. Now, I have it, and really the letter is like a page and a half, and then the rest of this is all the signatures. So you guys have probably heard of this. It was a huge list. The number is 741 security officials that have signed this letter. Now, let's talk about the letter first. There's a lot of information in there, or a lot of kind of opinion in there on why this body of people are endorsing Vice President Harris. And really, it's not even about endorsing her. It's about not endorsing President Trump. So they don't have necessarily the confidence in her, but it really is more about not endorsing President Trump. So that's a key thing in there. The next thing is that it says right in here, and I'll read it right to you. It says, "We are retired generals, admirals, senior non-commissioned officers, ambassadors, and senior civilian national security leaders. We are Republicans, Democrats, and independents. We are loyal to the ideals of our nation, like freedom, democracy, and the rule of law, not to any one individual or party." I would tell you that is accurate, but also misrepresenting. And here's why. So the letter itself is very brief. There are 741 signatures on there. And why are there 741 signatures on there? Because it's meant to be overwhelming. 700, everybody hears that and they go, wow, 741 security officials have, endorsed Vice President Harris and gone against President Trump. That's a huge number. And it is. It's a huge number, 741. Now, when you say 741 security leaders, right, that could mean any number of things. But what they don't want you to do is dig into who they are, what their background is, and what they represent. That's why it's 741. Okay. That anything that large, the average American is not going to dig into it. People are going to look at it and they're going to go, wow, National Security Leaders for America, 741 signatures. That's a lot of people going against President Trump. However, that's what I'm here for. So I dug into this and I spent like the last day and a half. I probably look a little haggard, but I spent the last day and a half digging through not really so much the letter itself, because it's really, the letter is very, very simple. What I dug into were the signatures and who's on the list. And here's what I will tell you. So just as an outset, right, I took a few key demographics out of this. Again, National Security Leaders for America. And the first thing that jumped out at me, so you've got in the order of signatures listed with the letter, you've got the president, right, of the organization. You've got the steering committee for this organization. And then the next thing that comes below that is senior military spouse advisors, right? Alarm bells went off in my head. I've been around, I spent 25 plus years around the military. I spent a lot of time around very, very senior spouses. And I would tell you that being a senior spouse does not qualify anyone as a national security leader. Nobody. Okay. Independent of an individual career. I know a lot of dual military couples. I know a lot of military couples where you've got a senior military leader and a spouse who does other things, has his or her own career, and is involved in security, defense, politics, whatever, right? But listing yourself under a senior military spouse advisor category, to me, immediately takes you off the list. There's 10 total spouses, senior military spouses, on this list. And I'm going to hurt some people's feelings when I break this list down for you, but I'm doing it for a reason. So we've got about 10 to a dozen military spouses, senior military spouses, listing themselves as national security leaders for America. On the surface, doesn't hold water with me. Next is about 30 senior non-commissioned officers across all branches. And I will tell you, there are certain levels of senior non-commissioned officers that I would consider, and that most people would consider, a national level senior security leader, right? If you are a service level E9, right? Sergeant major of the Army, Sergeant major of the Marine Corps, right? The Master Chief Petty Officer of the Navy. If you're one of those, that's a gimme. And there is one of those on here. Senior non-commissioned officer for the Marine Corps, former, is on this list. That 100%, I have no problem with that. No problem with listening to his opinion, because he has worked at national level and has national level exposure when it comes to security. But just by virtue of being a sergeant major or a chief petty, master chief petty officer or a senior master sergeant in the Air Force, that does not qualify you as a national level security leader. Oh, by the way, there are at least 2 E8s on this list. For those of you not familiar with the military, an E8, and they're both listed as retired first sergeants. Let me tell you something. A first sergeant works at a level where they supervise not more than about 200 people. And that's not at any level of national security, not even close. So there's some holes in this. And those were my first 2 kind of indicators that this list was extremely bloated and inflated to make it this 741, this massive number, to make it really overblown to the point where people don't even look through it. So I dug into it. There are 130 plus ambassadors on this list. Now, what's important about ambassadors? They are political appointees. They are appointed by a president. I got through, this is the signatures are in alphabetical order, and I think I got through the N's in the list of ambassadors, and I would tell you that probably 80+% of them were Clinton or Obama appointed. 80% easy. Clinton or Obama appointed. There are a couple of Bush. There was even some back as far as Reagan. These are not, necessarily young people. There are a lot of these people who are a significant number that are not involved with security anymore. You can look up their bios on Wiki. You can look them up on LinkedIn. You can look them up on all kinds of places. But you've got these ambassadors, and again, you retain that title of ambassador for life if you're, confirmed or put in that place politically appointed by a president. So we have a number of them, a large portion of them, that are Obama and or Clinton appointed. So what does that mean? That means that that's where their political allegiance lies. So again, in the beginning of the letter, where it says that they're not politically aligned, they really for America, I would tell you it's overabundance of people on this list are Democrats, just by and far, by and large. Of those 133 ambassadors that I looked through, some of them don't even fill what the general public would consider to be an ambassador, right? When you say ambassador, when I say ambassador, I think of an ambassador to Germany or to, Vietnam or to Australia or to, South Africa, where they are dealing with national level. They're representing the president and the administration at a national level with some pretty powerful players. There are some of these on here. One, listen, the size of the country matters. Okay. Their relationship with the United States matters. There are definitely some easier, places to be as an ambassador. But also at the same time, being an ambassador does not necessarily mean that you are assigned to a country. There are a number of ambassadors on here who have been given that title based on a lifetime of service in the State Department, the diplomatic service world. So never actually an ambassador to a country. So that's a little misleading. You've also got ambassadors to organizations, right? Not necessarily a country. So you got U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. You got U.S. ambassador to the EU. There's a couple of them who were ambassadors to an economic organization. Again, misleading to use the word ambassador. There's even a guy I found on here who lists his title as ambassador, was never an ambassador, was never listed as an ambassador in any documentation. He was listed as an ambassador under a different job title, but not a U.S. ambassador as designated by our government. So a little sketchy when it comes to ambassadors. And again, vast majority of them were Obama or Clinton or both appointees. So, obviously skewed in their political leanings. Loyalty is what it is. And the last thing I'll say about ambassadors is There are no specific qualifications to be an ambassador. None. Many of them, vast majority of them, come from the diplomatic service. They come from State Department. They are trained. They've spent a lifetime doing this stuff. But that is not in all cases. Remember, Shirley Temple was an ambassador. I'm just saying. And again, I said this, I'm going to hurt some feelings when I talk about this. I'm not saying that everybody on this list is bad. I'm not saying that, and I'm going to talk about some people that I would love to have a conversation with. I'm not saying that everybody on this list is biased towards, a political party. I'm just telling you that when you dig into this, which they don't want you to do, nobody wants you to dig into this list of 700 signatures. But that's what I did, and I dug into it. So, the vast majority of them are politically skewed. Not all of them, but most of them. So again, I'm going through some of my notes. So there are 220 combined flag officers from across the services. And when I say flag officers, I'm talking admirals and generals across Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard. And there are a number of Coast Guard flag officers on here as well. So what does that mean? Means a lot, especially when you dig into who they are. A lot of these, I dug into a lot of Army folks. It's who I am. I'm an Army guy, but I dug into a lot of these, and a significant number of these generals are lifetime National Guard and Reserve generals. Now, as a National Guard member or Reserve member, you have to remember these are for most days out of the year, not as generals, but before they were generals, they were private citizens. They're business owners. They lead a normal life, not like a full-time, there are points in their National Guard career or Reserve career where they will be on active duty. If they're in command positions, they will be activated at times and spend a significant, part of their life in uniform. However, they have spent a lot of their lives as just, normal, everyday American citizens. Why does that matter? Because they have other interests other than just being in the military, right? Again, business owners, right? Some of them have political jobs. There are a number of people on this list who were in the military or were ambassadors and are now either in office or running for office. National Guard, especially because in every state, there is what they call the tag, which is the adjutant general for the state. That is the senior ranking general for each state. That is a political appointment by a governor. Okay. If it's and again, there are very little qualifications that you have to be the tag for any state. But they are politically appointed. These are not necessarily rise through the ranks like an active duty officer would do to reach the rank of general. They do have careers like that, almost all of them. However, there is a highly politicized process for them to become a general in the National Guard at the state level. Now, there are other paths. There are division level commanders within the National Guard. There are National Guard Bureau level commanders, and those have a lot of federal inclination. But to get to that point, many of them have led a very politically influenced career in the National Guard. It's a fact of life. So while a number of them are Air National Guard and Army National Guard officers, they do have some political influence in their lives, which matters. Now, active duty wise, there was a lot of MD, PhD, and JAG officers on the list. So these are not necessarily your run-of-the-mill, Army officers or Marine Corps, Navy, or Air Force. There's not a lot of those on there. There are some for sure, but there's not a lot of them on there. So somebody who had a career path similar to mine, those are not the predominant population of general officers, flag officers that are on this list. Many of them are, if you look, they've worked in the world of medicine within the military. They've worked in the law, the legal world, JAG officers, and those kinds of places. So not your normal, when you think of a general, right? A Patton or somebody like that you've seen in a movie. Those aren't necessarily what you're seeing. There's some of those on here. I'm not going to lie, but not necessarily. That's not the predominance of the 220 flag officers that are on this list. So when you take that small group of spouses, the little bit larger group of senior enlisted non-commissioned officers, the ambassadors, and the flag officers, that is well over half of this list. Okay. And I've already pointed out where a lot of this, information is a little bit of a misrepresentation and a little bit skewed to make you think just because they know you're just going to skim the list. Ambassador. Okay. Or wow, that's a general, or that's a lieutenant general. Wow, that's a big deal. It's not necessarily what you think it is in all cases. But what you're not going to do, which is what I did, which is dig into a lot of these names and figure out who these people are. And let me tell you something, this list is cumbersome. And I say that because it's alphabetic by last name, but it's written out as title, first name, last name, kind of a thing. So every time, and I've been looking over this thing for the last day and a half, every time I look at this list, I either see a new name or I see a name that I had seen once before and had forgotten about, and I come back to it. And I've been poring over this thing. So it's a lot to take. It's a lot to take in. Let's talk about some of the other jobs that are on here. Okay. That I think it's the proper term is the Deputy Postmaster General for the post office is listed on here, or former, I think retired. But I wouldn't consider that individual's opinion any more of value than mine. There's also a lot of acting titles on here, acting secretary of this, or acting deputy of this, or acting this, or acting that. So that means that they weren't, if it was a cabinet level or even any position that requires Senate confirmation, they didn't achieve that. So, they could have been the acting secretary of whatever for a month, filling in the role, not a big deal. But if they were given that title in an acting role, they retain that. And that's what they choose to use. There's also a lot of acting deputy under assistant to, chief of this and that, right? These are, again, great long titles. It means a lot on paper, and it means a lot when you read it. It sounds very, very impressive. But when you dig into it and you find out what that actually means and the process for how someone is selected for one of those jobs, it very, very quickly becomes less impressive and less important. But there's a lot of those on here. And now we're talking about half of the list are in that, non-military, non-ambassador type role. So you've got a lot of staff folks who've been working in and around the Beltway for a very long time. Now, let's talk about some of the names that are on this list, both good and bad. And again, I told you there's some people that I would love to have a conversation with on this list. And because I do think I personally either know them or have a good handle on their reputation and would love to have a discussion with them. But let's talk about some of the people that are on here that are kind of no-brainer, but at the same time, it shows you how politicized this list really is. So Secretary Clinton, go figure, Secretary Hillary, Secretary of State Clinton is on this list. Former Secretary of Defense Panetta, who also was the director of the CIA, Obama appointment, both of those positions, is on this list. John Kerry is on this list again. Super blue left. We all know John Kerry. Gary Hart. I don't even know why they let that guy put his name on this list. For those of you that aren't old enough to remember, Gary Hart ran for president in 1984 and lost the Democratic nomination, and then ran again in 1988 for the 88 election, and was shamed he dropped out of the race very early when there were accusations of extramarital affairs, and then tried to jump back in the race and did very poorly in the primaries and dropped back out again. That's not a guy that I think anybody should be associated with or would want on a list like this, but they put him on there. There's also, and I talked about some of the some good and not so good flag officers. Lieutenant General Hertling is on the list. For those of you that maybe that name's ringing a bell, but you don't know why or where, he is the 3-star general that immediately after retiring went on CNN as a subject matter expert to talk about assault rifles, and consistently misrepresented and used horribly inaccurate terminology for somebody who's supposed to be a subject matter expert, including saying things like, I'm going to fire this on fully semi-automatic, which isn't even a thing. But he's a 3-star general, retired 3-star general. So that proves to you, for those of you that aren't familiar with the military, just because you're a general, they don't know everything. In fact, a lot of times when it comes to stuff like that, they don't know anything. And Lieutenant General Hertling is one of those people. So he's not a name that I would put a lot of weight behind as far as his opinion goes. Very, very not self-aware. And then the last one that I love this. So everybody's favorite Ukrainian supporter, lackluster, substandard lieutenant colonel retired, which he chose not to use that rank on this list, Alex Vindman. Who was, on the National Security Council, is the one who, was a whistleblower against President Trump. Go figure that he's on here. No big surprise. But again, chose not to use his retired military rank and chose to use a different title from when he was, advising the National Security Council. So again, not a name I'd want associated with this, but so be it. Now, let's talk about the folks that are on here that I think are interesting. And some of you may not know some of these people, but, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, I knew General Hodges a long time ago, 10 plus years ago. I didn't always agree with General Hodges. In fact, I had a few personal run-ins with him, but he's a very, very smart guy, and always respected his opinion. He is a product of General Petraeus. There's a linkage there between the two of them. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but he did work a lot for General Petraeus. And General Hodges is a guy that I would sit down and talk to, and I would be very interested in why he put his signature on this piece of paper. Lieutenant General Sanchez is another one. For those of you that remember the earliest days of Iraq, Lieutenant General Sanchez was involved in the invasion. He was one of the commanders in the early days. He's got a great reputation. I don't know him, but he's another one that I would like to have a conversation with. General Wes Clark is on the list. He's a bigwig and has been for a long time, but like a handful of other retired 4-stars that I found on this list, including a former assistant commandant of the Marine Corps. He's very long in the tooth. He's not a young man, and he's been retired for a very long time. There are retired general officers, 4-stars on this list that have been retired since, for over 25 years. There are former ambassadors on this list that are in their 80s and even pushing 90 years old. Some of them have lost relevance but retained the title, and that's why they're on the list. It's because of the title, not because of anything else. General Clark is one of those that's approaching that window of relevancy. John Brennan, who is a guy who has never been shy about expressing his opinion, no matter who he upsets. He would be one that his perspective on this would be very, very interesting. I know he's not necessarily a President Trump fan, but I would also be interested in why he decided to join in on this, and what his thoughts are on Vice President Harris, because that would be the great flip side to this coin. Michelle Flournoy, I've met in my previous life in the Army. I met her a couple of times. She's an undersecretary of defense, and is probably one of the smartest people that I've ever seen in the defense structure. Really, really a brilliant lady. And I would be interested in her perspective on this. And then the last one that caught my eye, and it took me a second because I knew the name and it took me a minute to place it. So Major General Taguba, for those of you that are a little bit older, Major General Taguba is the one who wrote the report that blew the lid off of Abu Ghraib. And subsequently was brought back to Washington, D.C., and after a period of time was directed to retire. Now, why would I like to talk to General Taguba? Because he is a guy that is not afraid to tell it like it is. He's not afraid of the repercussions, and he is, surely not afraid of the ramifications of what he's going to say. So he would be a great one, I think, just to have the discussion with, because I'm sure that is who he is as a person, and that would be, I think, of great value to this discussion. So just breaking that down for you, the letter itself, again, the intent behind this was to make it cumbersome, to make it a headline that people listen to, they read, they're shocked by, they may take a cursory look at the letter and then the massive list of signatories on there and just bypass it and not dig into who's on there. But I would recommend to all of you, take a few minutes randomly, just randomly pick out a name from each page or maybe one from every third or fourth letter of the alphabet. Just grab one and do some research on who they are and where their political alignment is. I would be willing to bet, if you pick 10 names off of there, I would be willing to bet that 9 of them are Democrats. So while, again, there are Republicans on here, there are, Bush appointees on here, both Bush and even President Reagan. There's a lot of Clinton, a lot of Obama. It took me halfway through the list to find a single ambassador that was appointed by President Trump. I did find one. He's on there, and there may be more. I found the one, and it took a while. So while it said, again, we're Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, which is true, I would tell you that this is probably not a very even split amongst the political leanings. So it's big. It's meant to be big. It's meant to be cumbersome. It's meant to be a headline, but it is not meant for you to dig into as an American, as the voting public. So hopefully I can, I shed a little bit of light on the value or lack of value of this document. And again, the letter itself is a page and a half. And the next, I think 18 pages or so are signatures. So it's a lot to take in. But, the intent is to have that impact on the election itself, to sway potentially some voters who would not dig into this and go, wow, if there's that many, people against President Trump, security leaders of America or for America, then, maybe I should listen to that. And I would tell you, if you dig into it at all, it's not what you think it is. So, that again, I did it for you. I did some of the homework. Dig into it for yourself. But we've got, bigger and more immediate problems. I think I saw, I'm a Chicago kid, born and raised. The city. I used to run around the city as a teenager, unsupervised, causing various levels of trouble. But it is my hometown, and I do love it. And it's a mess, and it's about to get worse. So there's a headline out there. There's already been activity from these Venezuelan gangs. You remember the one from Colorado took over the apartment complex? They just arrested 10 of those guys, by the way. But the Chicago police are already anticipating a high-level gang war, with the influx of these Venezuelan gangs. Now, Chicago is no stranger to gangland warfare. I mean, we're going back a century, right? We're talking Al Capone, we're talking all of that, and it's carried through. Even when I was a kid, there was always gang violence in the city, although it was restricted to small pockets in specific areas, and it was fairly limited. It did not expand throughout the city. Well, I will tell you, my greatest fear is that a turf war is going to emerge out of this as these Venezuelan gangs, come in and try to establish themselves. Chicago gangs are not going to go lightly. They're not going to go softly, and it's going to get ugly, and it's going to get ugly very quickly. But there are portions of the city that are somewhat free or untouched or very lightly influenced by the gangs. And my fear is that even those locations are going to be influenced. They're going to be touched. You're going to see a crime increase across the city, but you're going to see a significant increase in high-level violent crime. And again, this goes back to the border. By the way, Chicago's not the only place. That just, I saw just literally before I hit record on this. Oh, by the way, I'm recording Wednesday afternoon. Right before I recorded that there is also speculation that this is starting to occur in New York City. So you're starting to see an influx of these Venezuelan gangs into New York as well. So it's going to keep going, and it's going to keep growing in the hundreds of thousands of individuals that have crossed the borders, not just border. It's not just the Southwest. The borders, there's, trouble is coming with them. And now it seems to be this Venezuelan gang or gangs that are coming in, and they're doing what gangs do. They're establishing themselves. They're trying to establish business, and they're going to get into all the things that gangs normally do. It's going to be, human trafficking. It's going to be drug sales. It's going to be illegal weapons. It's going to be all of those things that the criminal gangs do. And when you start cutting into other gangs' territory and their money, things tend to get violent. And that is my big fear right now, is that we as a nation, especially in the major population centers, are going to see a spike of violence that is going to do some significant damage to the nation, because you're going to start to see more and more people move out of the major metropolitan areas for fear of their own safety. You're going to see property values go down. You're going to see all of that. It's going to happen. It's coming. And I said borders earlier because, another story that I just read today is they're starting to see another increase in northern border traffic crossings, illegal crossings, upstate New York specifically, as it borders with Canada. They were talking to a landowner, a farmer up there who's got trail cameras set out there for deer. At least that's how it started. And now he's observing, hundreds per week through his area. Even after someone just got arrested in New York with a plot to for a terrorist act in the city. It's troubling, and it's troubling because of the impact on all of us. But at the same time, we're starting to see other things. If you haven't been tracking down in Mexico, right or in and around the border, there's a war going on between cartels, Sinaloa cartel, and some others, and that is starting to bleed across slowly. The war itself, not necessarily, but what you're starting to see is there was a cache of high military grade, and I'm not talking about AR-15s. I'm talking about military grade weaponry, RPGs, belt-fed machine guns, like heavy duty stuff right at the border on the Mexican side, but it is starting to flow over. And that's where we are really, really going to start having some issues here in the United States. As it stands right now, it's a criminal activity. It's violent criminal activity, but it's not elevated beyond that. And my fear is that it is going to continue to escalate beyond that. And we're really going to have some significant problems, even potentially terroristic problems on our hands as a result. So keep an eye on the border itself. Start watching those major metropolitan areas. If you live near one, I would definitely start paying attention. If you live in one, you might want to reconsider that. But Chicago and New York City are already feeling the impact of it. And my feeling specifically about Chicago is, we are who we are in the city, and even our gangs are the Chicago people, and they're not going to back down. So the alternative to backing down is to fight, and my fear is it's going to get pretty ugly. And God bless the blue out there, the Chicago PD. And I have good friends that work Chicago PD. I have friends that work New York, NYPD, and God bless all of them, because you're going to be the ones caught in the middle of all this as it escalates and continues to get worse. So, let's, and if nothing else, just to save our cities, but to save our officers, their lives, their families, let's see if we can get this border closed in reality, not just a promise from a presidential candidate, but get it closed down, start some deportations. Let's de-escalate this and get this thing under control. I can tell you who's not doing that, and that's the current president. President Biden just had his first cabinet meeting in a year. A year. I understand that presidents have in-office meetings with individual cabinet members. That is not a holistic form of government, okay? Especially when you start talking about diplomacy, when you talk about international relations, there's components to that spread across the entire cabinet. And you can't do that effectively if you're not meeting with the entire cabinet. And let's just say Israel. When you want to talk about Israel, you have to bring in the Secretary of State. You have to bring in the Secretary of Defense. You have to bring in Commerce. You have to bring in Transportation, because it all matters. It all matters, right? Our relationship with Israel is not just bound by military. It's not just bound by diplomacy. It's bound by industry. It's bound by intelligence. It's bound by all kinds of things. Commerce. And every country in the world we have a relationship with is built on those things. And you can't go a year without putting your entire cabinet in one room together. That is the most inefficient, ineffective presidency I can think of. It's also horrifically bad leadership. And we all know, listen, the cat's out of the bag. We all know that President Biden is incompetent and incapable. But this goes back to before that. This goes back a year. A year he's been doing this. Vice President Harris knew this. You know how I know? Because she's part of this, right? She knows everything that's going on and hasn't been going on. So he hasn't had a cabinet meeting in a year, which she is aware of. He's been spending a lot of time on the beach, as we're all aware of, because it's on the news every day. He's been taking a lot of vacation, and we all know that he has been deemed essentially mentally incapable. And she's out campaigning. So who's in charge? Who's in charge? Really? And I will tell you, we got a glimpse of it in this cabinet meeting. Because you know who was there? Who's not normally there? Dr. Jill Biden. Dr. Jill Biden was in the cabinet meeting and actually spoke on a White House initiative, which, okay, fine, right? Every first lady has their Nancy Reagan was, don't do drugs. They all have it. They all have a project. They all have a pet focus, whatever you want to call it. Every first lady does. But she was in a cabinet meeting, And rumor has it she was doing more than just sitting on the sideline. Now, Elsa and I have talked about this. I've been saying this for over a year, that the biggest obstacle to getting President Biden out of the White House or to convince him not to run was Dr. Jill Biden. And I am convinced that she is the one who is currently making decisions for our country. Non-elected, never been in office in her life, hasn't been elected to do anything, hasn't even been appointed to do anything. She is in that building by virtue of being married to an inept president. And she's running things. Now, we have had this before. I don't know if we've had it to this degree, but we have had this before. Eleanor Roosevelt, it's no secret, was a power player, right? As her husband's health was declining, she stepped in. There are rumors about Nancy Reagan stepping in mostly, and I won't say exclusively, but mostly to protect her husband as his mental faculties started to decline in the last year or two of his presidency, of his second term. I don't think she necessarily was making decisions in this capacity, as we're assuming Dr. Jill Biden is. She was more in a role of, protecting President Reagan from being overwhelmed, trying to make sure that he was being taken care of. So we've had first ladies that have stepped into these kinds of situations before. I'd heard something potentially about President Wilson's wife. Never heard that before, but in the context of this discussion, I guess it kind of matters. So this is not necessarily an entirely new concept, but at the same time, it is disturbing. It's also disturbing because everybody keeps talking about November. President Biden's in office until early January. We've got over 3 months of this left, and the entire world is continuing to watch. So I'm a little bothered. I'm a lot bothered, frankly, about the no cabinet meeting for a year. I'm a lot bothered by the idea that, Dr. Biden has been stepping in and making decisions, even though that's what most of us assumed. But even if she isn't, then the question is, who is? We've got people out there like, speculative George Soros. That's not speculative. George Soros is making decisions, at an arm's length. But you've got people in there, probably the chief of staff of the White House, making decisions. You've got the vice president's out campaigning. She's not making decisions for anything, for anybody. But you've got cabinet members that are probably making unilateral decisions. Go back a few months. Anybody remember? I talked about this. Anybody remember when Secretary Austin, the Secretary of Defense, kind of disappeared and had an operation done and then had to be readmitted to the hospital, and he never told the White House? Why do you think that is? It's because President Biden was completely incapable. And Secretary Austin just said, it doesn't matter if I tell him or not. I'm making all the decisions without him anyway, so I'm just going to do it. And I'm sure now, hindsight being 2020, that's exactly what was happening. It was irresponsible, and I said this before, it was irresponsible for Secretary Austin to do that. But at the same time, when the president's incapable, incompetent, why bother? So that's another indicator, that you've probably got people out there making decisions without the backing of the president, specifically. But I'm also very bothered by the fact that in the midst of all this, as many times as the 25th Amendment has been mentioned against President Trump specifically, but also even not that long ago about President Biden, that while we have more and more and more evidence on a daily basis that he is incompetent, nobody's brought up the 25th Amendment and taking him out of office. I'm sure it's because they don't want to give Vice President Harris the title of president, making her an incumbent. And it probably has everything to do with the election. I can make all kinds of speculation. But the reality is that she's not running the country right now. No one is running the country right now. No singular person is in charge. And it's an issue. And we're doing nothing to address it. We're ignoring it. All of us Americans, we're all guilty. We're all looking to November, and then we're all looking to January. That's all we're looking for. And it's shameful because right now we are extremely, extremely vulnerable, and no one's taking action in Congress to do anything about it. So that's another kind of spoke in the wheel of things that are, not going right now. However, taking a look at the election and the current polls, it is about the battleground states right now. Everything that's going on, the election is going to be decided by probably the 5 or 6 battleground states, as the last few of them have. But we're starting to see some interesting traction by President Trump in places like Pennsylvania. It's the fracking discussion is big. Pennsylvania right now is a dead heat. President Trump now has a reported, and again, these are polls. So listen, even if I say he's got a reported lead by, percentage points, there's always the margin of error. It could be a lot better. It could be a lot worse. It could be even. These are all very, very close races in the battleground states, but they're getting closer. In the states where President Trump was behind, unfortunately, in a lot of these states, he was well ahead of President Biden before President Biden dropped out of the race. And then Vice President Harris got anointed, not elected, not selected by voters, anointed by the state-run media and the Democratic Party, not by you, the people, us, the people, any of us. Since she took over, there was a surge, there's a flip in a lot of the battleground states. She caught a lot of traction. A lot of those states favor her for a lot of reasons. I don't think it's competency. I think people in a lot of those states are voting based on demographics. Truthfully, I think that when it was two white guys, they were picking, one white guy over the other, and it was very, very clear. And now that you've got President Trump and Vice President Harris, people are voting because she's a woman or because she is minority, Black, Indian, whatever, whatever their reasoning is. I think there's a lot of people voting based on demographic and not on capability. So in those battleground states specifically, that was the backlash, right? That was the whiplash from her being anointed as the Democratic nominee. And I think what we're starting to see is people settling back to reality. I think you are starting to see folks as they watch this and they watch her and they don't hear her press conference because she still hasn't had one 50-something days in. And they see the horrible interviews that she's done. And they don't want to hear that she's grew up in the middle class anymore. And they don't want to hear any of those things. And they see her flip-flopping on things. People are starting to realize that she is a hollow candidate, my opinion. And they're starting to swing back towards President Trump. So, promises made. I said fracking before. Pennsylvania, that's a huge thing. And nobody, I think, believes Vice President Harris when she says that she's all now she's all for fracking. So that's her newest and latest position. So I don't think we're seeing. I think what we're seeing is a shift. I don't know how much of a shift is going to happen before Election Day, if it's going to be enough in enough states. But the election is surely going to be decided in those 6 or so battleground states. Georgia's leaning Trump. Pennsylvania is a dead heat. Michigan is closing the gap very, very quickly. So those, and oh, by the way, Georgia just determined we have to count all the ballots by hand on Election Day before anything can be validated. So don't expect unless Georgia becomes irrelevant in the Electoral College, don't expect a, Election Day decision on who the president is. Because if we're waiting on Georgia as a tiebreaker, it's going to take a day or two because they got to count all the votes by hand. Their state Supreme Court determined that. So the battleground states are going to matter just like they always do. But in this election, I think they're going to matter for everything. There's the polls are what they are. Be aware of the mainstream state-run media. I'm not even calling it mainstream anymore. Elsa tipped me onto that, and I like it. The state-run media is trying to manipulate the election by telling you, oh, it's a done deal. Yeah, Vice President Harris has already won. She's already won, which is going to discourage, people from voting. Hopefully it'll discourage, truthfully. Actually, I hope it doesn't discourage anybody from voting. I think everybody should vote. If you don't, you've got your own personal reasons, then, so be it. I get it. But I think that, the state-run media is trying to manipulate it by discouraging people from voting as if the election is a foregone conclusion. I think that's the intent behind the polls and their reporting of the current situation. So watch the battleground states, watch the polls there over the next couple of weeks, watch the fluctuation as we get closer to November. And watch the expansion of law enforcement capability across the federal government. This caught my attention the other day because you're starting to see federal agencies and organizations endorsing candidates for president, which I think is abhorrent. I think it should be like, I understand unions. Oh, by the way, Teamsters didn't back any candidate. I think we talked about that last week. I understand organizations like that. I understand lobbying organizations taking a position. I understand unions taking a position. I understand charity organization, all of that. Non-governmental entities, if they have a political leaning as an organization, so be it. Good for them. No government agency should be endorsing a candidate for president, period. Because they have to work for whoever gets elected, no matter who they endorsed. So the other day, it came out that the IRS and some others were endorsing Vice President Harris to be president. Well, of course they are. Why? Because the Biden administration increased their size and their capability, their capacity. We know about the tens of thousands of IRS agents that have been now armed to have the capability to come to your house and, threaten you with violence to collect taxes. We're getting into Robin Hood kind of stuff here. But the IRS and their expanding role beyond, tax filing, tax collecting electronically is getting a lot worse. But that's because we have introduced law enforcement capability into a bunch of federal agencies that frankly don't need it, shouldn't have it. We have law enforcement. If you want to increase federal law enforcement capability, grow the FBI, right? Leave it with the people that should have it. Grow the Secret Service, grow the portions of the Treasury Department that deal with money, enforcement of money, have that. But the IRS and some of these other organizations that have law enforcement capability, have armed, badged, sworn members taking on law enforcement tasks is ridiculous. It is total government overreach. It is tiptoeing into Big Brother territory, and they are expanding beyond where they should be. And I go back and I say this wholeheartedly: when the Patriot Act passed, and we all thought, the nation thought it was a great idea because it was going to help counter terrorism. It was going to give us a capability to counter terrorism and prevent another 9/11. I was a pretty young man when that happened, and was an Army officer and lived in a kind of world where things were very, very serious. And even then, I looked at the Patriot Act and I said, "This is a horrible idea." And I still believe it's a horrible idea, but it is expanded. And I think that this type of expansion for the IRS and these other organizations having law enforcement capability, I think, is way beyond bounds. And then on top of it, the fact that they are taking political positions is crazy. I think it should be illegal, straight up illegal. I don't think they should have any dog in that fight. I don't think they should even express an opinion, because they like Vice President Harris because she made them bigger. But what happens when President Trump comes in and he gets elected? They still have to work for him, or whoever else for that matter. That's how that works. So I don't like the fact that they are expressing or endorsing candidates. I think it's wrong. I think it's wrong all the way around. All right. Lastly, this past week, we had talked about this last show, but between last show and now, I did go see Matt Walsh's movie, Am I Racist? And I will tell you, there are a couple of, number one, if you don't know who Matt Walsh is, you need to look him up. I would start with his it's not even a mockumentary, right? Spinal Tap's a mockumentary. That's not what Matt Walsh is, although it's pretty close. He started, the one that I saw first was What is a Woman? Where Matt Walsh went to all these people in the, on the fight for sexual equality, the fight for abortion, the DEI, in the sense of gender studies in the educational world. And he was just simply asking them, what is a woman? And if you want to laugh at the absurdity of that entire discussion, go watch it, because he doesn't do anything underhanded at all in that entire film. What is a woman? Go watch it. That will lead you into, among other things, Matt Walsh has got a ton of material, Am I Racist?, which just is out in theaters right now. And he was forced to, because people know who he is. He's much more recognizable now. So very early in the film, he went to a session where people were going to talk about their whiteness and some other things, and he just went in looking like himself. Now, he gave a false name, but people very rapidly caught on to who he was, and then he was asked to leave. And actually, there was a guy who tried to take a physical stance with him that you know, Matt Walsh is a smart guy, but that I got a little amped up. I can tell you that guy who, if you see the movie, he kind of stands over Matt with this impending, imposing kind of tone in his voice, and he was going to physically escort him out of the room. And I certainly wouldn't have responded to that as gracefully as Matt Walsh did. Regardless, what he ends up doing, because he is more recognizable, and you could call it underhanded if you want to, but he goes in disguise, and he puts on a man bun wig and some skinny jeans, and he carries a man purse, and he goes and he talks to all these people. He talks to people from everywhere. He talks to people from the poorest parts of America. He talks to Black people. He talks to white people. He talks to underprivileged. He talks to some guys in the motorcycle gang, not gang, but like motorcycle club, Harley rider guys like down south. He talks to all kinds of people in the education world. He talks to authors. He talks to professors. He talks to all kinds of people. And really what I took away from the film, and not to reveal too much, but what I took away from the film is, one, the vast majority of America believes wholeheartedly that everybody bleeds the same color. That was repeated in the film multiple times, and I get it. You're going to say it was propaganda or whatever, but I do believe that. I don't believe that America, the heart of America, is a racist nation anymore. Do I think that existed? Of course it did. Do I think it still exists? No, I don't. But I think that's, so he kind of leans into that. But I think what he also uncovers is, one, educated America is dumb, really, really dumb, like unbelievably stupid. White suburban women have been convinced that they're racist. I think he uncovers that most of America is so burnt out on this entire discussion that they'll do whatever they can to just not even have to listen to it anymore. They'll sign petitions. They'll do whatever. They don't, people just want to move on and just get away from it. They don't care. But I think the biggest thing that he unveils in all of this is that DEI specifically has become a business, and it has nothing to do with benefiting people. It has nothing to do with making things better for the country or for individuals. And it has everything to do with making money. It has become a business. DEI, racial studies, has become a business. And he does it in the movie, he does it in a very smart way, because he keeps a tally on how much money people are making or how much money he is spending in these experiences. So I do highly recommend Am I Racist? Matt Walsh. Suspend your political beliefs when you go in there. Just go in there and watch and listen. It's very entertaining. Go in with a sense of humor and enjoy it. But it is eye-opening, and it is very well done. It's very, very smart, but it's also a little unsettling at really how stupid some of the most educated people in America are. I will tell you, there is an author that he interviews who is a 3-year running New York Times bestselling author. And when she realizes how dumb she looks on film, I'm sure she was livid. Absolutely. Now she's probably laughing all the way to the bank, because I'm sure she's probably, she had to sign a release at some point. She probably sued him, but she also has 3 years on the New York Times bestseller list for a piece of trash book. But she looks stupid. She looks utterly stupid on film. And oh, by the way, you can look her up. But White Fragility is the book, and she has a PhD, and her PhD is under significant scrutiny for plagiarism. Go figure. Anyway, I do recommend Am I Racist? I think you should go see. I think everybody should go see it. I think it's important for the discussion. You don't even have to agree with it. You may walk out of there and hate it. I don't care, but I think you should go see it for the value of the discussion about racism in the United States, and the way that it's been flipped away from trying to do the right thing to trying to make money. So, okay. Wow. I knocked out another hour. Hey, one last thing about this National Security Leaders for America list that I went through at the beginning. Something not to forget about this and about the 741 signatures that are on this, no matter their political leaning. President Trump has made multiple, and he did it in his last term, and he has made multiple promises in this campaign that he is going to end wars, right? He's not going to let the United States get drug into more wars. He's going to end the war in Ukraine. He is the guy, I've said it before, that can broker a peace deal in the Middle East and stop this crap with Israel and Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran. So that National Security Leaders for America list, how many of those people do you think work in the defense industry or have investments in the defense industry, who make money off of war, who are war hawks and have personal benefit coming from the United States, either selling military goods or participating in warfare around the globe? I bet it's a pretty high number. So while they may be Republicans, Democrats, and independents, and they may be, generals, admirals, senior non-commissioned officers, ambassadors, and senior civilians from the national security realm, I would bet that a large number of them profit and benefit off of America at war. Something to think about. Okay. Again, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you tune in for the whole hour. Elsa will be back next week, I think. She didn't tell me until late, but I think she'll be back next week. And, as always, we appreciate the support. Rebuilding Elsa's Facebook profile is going to matter. We've watched the growth and continued movement over on YouTube, and we really, really do appreciate it. And as always, from me, I will see you next week, and keep moving, keep shooting.